your hard hat and your steel-toed boots. It's time for the Tower Report. We drill down to the issues, best practices, and current events of oil and gas vendor risk management. Here's your host, Rick Roybal.
Hi, Lee. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Rick. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me today on the Tower Report.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you are, I'm in Texas, Roanoke, Texas, and tell us where you are.
I'm in Denver.
Yeah? And how long have you been in Denver?
Oh, except for a slight break for a few years, I have been in Denver since 2002.
Okay, fantastic. Long time. That kind of bookends the twice that I've lived in Colorado. So you've outlasted me there. So anyways, but I'm glad to have you on the show, and we've kind of taken a little bit of a departure from the normal Tower Report where we have sort of, auditors, contract management, vendor management type of folks, and now we're kind of getting in a little bit more of operations, and then even more of, I would say, a left turn is having a geoscientist join me today. This is really like headline news for the Tower Report. So
Yeah, we're always a good left turn.
oh yeah, all these left turns, right? So anyway, so I think what we'll do today is a couple things. Is that number one is highlight your career, what you've been doing, what you've been working on, and things that are near and dear to your heart. We'll also kind of highlight some of the things, what I call, the things that you were afraid to ask type of questions, about geology. And then perhaps we'll dig a little bit deeper into, really what the Tower Report is, and that's kind of drilling into oil and gas vendor risk management, but from a geoscientist geology perspective. Does that sound okay to you?
Perfect.
Okay, well, why don't you take a couple minutes and just tell the audience a little bit about who you are, what kind of things you've been doing, what you enjoy doing.
All right. Yeah. So I'm a geoscientist with an MBA, with a career that has spanned Fortune 500s to small nonprofits. And my special sauce as an executive is combining people leadership with analytical problem solving. And we're here to talk about geology. So I'll tell you, I didn't get into it in the usual way. I didn't grow up collecting rocks or thinking they were cool.
I was going to ask that question.
Most geologists did have an interest growing up or knew about it, had somebody in their family. But I was actually in college already and helping a friend study for his Geo 101 exam by just quizzing him on a worksheet that he had. And I started thinking, well, this is really interesting. Sort of problem solving puzzle pieces to reverse engineer a dynamic process. Cool.
Yeah.
Bachelor's and master's degree later, I got a job with Texaco by cold calling from Heart's Directory.
Really?
Wow. I did.
And it worked.
Yeah. And had a great time working in Louisiana, assets there, conventional work. And then later on, I went back to get an MBA and discovered unconventionals with Williams. And that was love at first sight. Big projects, fast-paced, huge budgets, big teams that had to work together to solve problems in the moment, invent new ways of doing things. And it was just a great fit for me and a great challenge. A lot of all-nighters in 15 years, solving those problems. Great team experiences. So I've loved that and have been doing that for the last 15 years.
That's fantastic. So what the jump from conventional to unconventional, is that a big jump, or is it something that just, you said the all-nighters, but I mean, is it literally, I have to look at these rocks differently,
Yes. So the role of a geoscientist in the oil and gas industry changes and evolves as you transition from conventional to unconventional. It's pretty fundamental how that role evolves and has evolved over the last 10 years.
Well, maybe we should kind of back up just even further than that. Why don't you define what conventional means versus unconventional? So when the audience kind of hears that, like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So a conventional oil and gas development means that you're producing oil or natural gas from a reservoir rock, which means it's nice and porous. If you punch a hole in it, it will happily give up what's in there. And it's about finding it. The challenge of the play is about finding where the oil and gas has bubbled up and gotten trapped in the rocks. And it's a little bit of treasure hunting and sleuthing that are really the key in that. Sort of history telling as you study the rocks. With unconventionals, you're looking at where the oil and gas actually formed in the rock. It hasn't bubbled up and moved anywhere else, and it doesn't want to come out, really. And so when you poke a hole in that, you have to do a lot more to figure out how the rocks will respond, how the fluids will respond, and design a program in partnership with engineers to get it out for an economic price.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So could you almost look at it from in terms of like the way that you would drill a vertical well versus horizontal? I mean, vertical is really, analogous to conventional play, and then conversely, unconventional would be more horizontal drilling. Is that right?
That is frequently a characteristic difference between the two, correct?
Gotcha. This is the beauty of working in a podcast in a house. You get to hear the doorbell ring. That's what my audience will hear. So we'll ignore that. But the question I was kind of just struggle a little bit with and you and I have known each other for several years. I mean, in fact, we used to work together, and we'd have occasional conversations. Most of the time it was in the break room, but an auditor's not always knocking on Lee's door, hey, help me out with this or whatever else. So I think that's probably the case for a lot of maybe the people listening. So one of the things I was thinking about, here we are defining unconventional versus conventional, is maybe kind of talk us through a little bit about what's the difference between sort of a geoscientist and a geologist. Is there a difference? Is it just, apples and oranges, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, so first and foremost, a geoscientist is a scientist, and a scientist is somebody who asks questions and sort of makes an educated guess about what the answer might be, and then goes and tests that does experiments in order to test their ideas and give feedback on that. And so a geoscientist is someone for whom the questions are about the Earth. Mm-hmm. Geoscientist is an umbrella term that encompasses geologist, petrophysicist, geophysicist, and under geology, which is another, geologist is another umbrella that encompasses stratigraphers and structural geologists and all sorts of other subdisciplines. So it's really, the geoscientist is a term that would encompass all the people working in that field.
I see. Very complex, a lot of different, looking at sort of a tree structure, things that are being, breaking off, that this person has a nuanced kind of field in geoscience. Is, coming into that, when you were the very first job, let's say at Williams, were the doors open to like all those different jobs, or is it kind of something that you're studying for to become, a geophysicist versus something else? Or
yes, so in oil and gas, often, and especially in the past, there was an expectation that you would have a master's degree. So you would study sort of a generalist program as an undergraduate, and then as a master's student, you would specialize a little bit more, which would help determine what kind of a group you went in at a large oil company. But sort of paired with that transition into unconventionals, that isn't as much of a requirement. And so the specialists often evolve on the job, and depending on what company needs are. So each geologist is going to have coursework in many of those different functions, and how much you begin to apply it at work is a matter of need and personal achievement and decision.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there's a lot of ongoing professional development as a geoscientist.
Absolutely. Sort of the new product development wing of oil and gas. Mm-hmm. you're definitely having to stay on top of things, read the literature, talk about it, go to conferences and hear talks, give talks.
Yeah, absolutely.
An active learning type of environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else that I noticed as far as a characteristic of a lot of geoscientists is that some of them have a financial, when you talk about the MBA or master's degree, I mean, it sounds like they really have to have some type of kind of grounding in economics and finance, et cetera, because, if you're sitting at the table with the CFO and other people you really have to be talking about the numbers and the dollars to make sense and convince them that this is the right play.
Yeah, I would say that that's one of the differentiators. As somebody who works on employee development for geologists, geoscientists, I always encourage that they take a finance class or understand IRRs, really get familiar with that because it's not typically part of a curriculum in school. Mm-hmm. And so working closely with a reservoir engineer who's running the economics, really getting an understanding of that does become a differentiator for geologists. Not all geologists have that or are even interested in it. They're more research focused or very focused on finer points. And so being able to take that bigger picture can be a good differentiator.
I see. Something else that in my reading, and it just, is Google searches. I read this, is that many articles about geoscientists begin something like this. Geoscientists start by interpreting seismic data acquired. And so one of the things that it's kind of always kind of sticking in the back of my head that's not readily, and there's not an answer to it, and that is like, where are you acquiring the data from? As a geoscientist, are you the ones out there searching for the new prospect? What part do you have in that? Can you kind of shed some light there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, geoscientists traditionally have been that sort of new product development, the finding, the saying X marks the spot, drill here. And that's still true to some extent and on the conventional projects throughout the world. But starting with seismic is more characteristic of that than it is of unconventionals. Mm-hmm. So, really geoscientists have become a mix of scientists and project managers who are looking at the industry from a cradle to grave kind of standpoint. So geologists are involved before you even own the asset. So they're there to tell you where to buy. They're working through strategic planning once you've bought the asset. Then as you start to do operations, you have sort of a different group of geologists typically who then take on that manufacturing part. You transitioning from new product development to manufacturing. Then you have those operations geoscientist who then works with drilling, completions, land, production, all those disciplines that actually make things happen. And then as the asset matures and you're ready to start valuing it so that you can sell it, then the exploration geologist comes back and works on that presentation for a divestiture. So really there are roles for geoscientists all the way through that. Some people can do all those different roles. Others are more specialists on one side or the other. But that's sort of how we evolve over time.
That's fantastic. That's a great way to kind of frame it. And it makes a lot of sense where a geoscientist would be involved from, like you say, cradle to grave. I imagine that the same case is that there are geoscientists that have those skill sets to be able to do all those things, but there's still a reliance on third parties to help provide services or goods, et cetera.
Absolutely. Yes. There's a lot of collaboration with outside vendors. A lot of value of information calculations that come into play in terms of whether to get something new, get some new data, or to buy existing data from somebody who has it. And in both of those cases, you would be bringing in a third party to help you acquire the information that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So there are well logs, seismic data, core, where you actually take a cylindrical piece of rock out of the ground and you compare it to those electrical logs that you've run, kind of look like an EKG or something like that you might have seen. And you compare the EKG to the rock to then the sort of ultrasound image. And you're comparing all of those and trying to get the best combination of information from those three things, or any combination of those. But those are only in certain places. So you can't have a log or a core everywhere, right? Seismic can be three-dimensional and helps, but it's low resolution. And so working with the data, you have to be able to begin to tell a story to justify how you connect those dots. And the longer you do it and the more thoughtful you are and the more you talk to your colleagues and read their papers, the better you are at tying analogy and context in to do a better job of telling that story that allows you to connect the dots.
See, wow. Okay, wow. That's, this role sounds even more complex as you continue to kind of unravel it or uncover, these stones and rocks, as you might say, right?
I'm supposed to be making it sound accessible.
Man, it's over my head, but no, this is great, fantastic. Now, would geoscientists actually be out on site with some of the people that are doing the well logs as well? Is that part of your role?
Yes, so we go out for specialty acquisition of data. So expensive logs, core, seismic, we would be going to location to participate in that project. Sometimes we'll have a role where we're saying when to start coring, or whether the logging run is safe, right? We look at the information from the drilling equipment and we help decide that. We work with regulatory agencies to ensure that we can go across certain parts of land or water to acquire seismic data. And so we'll be out traveling to meet with people, various kinds of parties, to establish that the work can actually take place. So there are a lot of ways in which we do that. And sometimes the vendor relationships are stacked on top of each other in those
what does that mean?
Projects. So we have, you'll have multiple, often on a large acquisition program, you'll have a primary vendor, but then you might hire somebody else to help watch over them because the project is so complex. And so you're working mostly with that person, but then you're in the field with the people acquiring the data. And then there's a separate person, a separate company who would then do additional processing that would be specific to your needs on that particular project. So it can get stacked up and pretty interesting.
And pretty expensive too, I imagine.
It can be big dollars, yes. So, I've run a project that involved 2 rounds of these large acquisitions, one to ask a question and test a hypothesis, and the second then to prove that the way we tested the hypothesis bore out. So it was sort of a field test to make sure. And that whole 2-year program was $12 million, I believe. And then others here and there, $500,000 typically, for some of the cores.
With such a high expenditure amount with third parties and such, I know the answer is going to be, but I'm asking anyways. I imagine that these contracts and service agreements that you have with them have to be really, really well thought out. What are some key things that you would, expect to see in a service agreement with a third party?
Yeah, those can take months to evolve. There are different ways, different methods of pricing. And so you want to make sure that you're establishing how you're pricing it and then what those specific pieces are in a dollar amount, so that everybody, if they got out their calculator, they would come up with the same number at the end. Because when you're doing that process, that's the number, that final one after all those calculations is the number that you take to management and tell them, hey, I need $3 million for this large acquisition. And here is the value that it's going to provide, which is more than $3 million, right? And if you're not careful about that, because there are all these different pieces, you can forget something, you can fail to budget. And so that's something over the years I've learned to be really careful about. And there's a lot of transparency between the vendor and the internal folks working on it, as well as between the internal folks and the people providing the money for that project.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah. What about, sorry, I'm hearing my dog in the background here. Sorry, again, in a normal day, there wouldn't be anybody home, but my podcasts are at home. So anyways, sorry about that. The other question I have is around service agreement contracts. Imagine that the confidentiality clause has to be really buttoned up as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, in some of these programs, the buyer does not actually own the data. So part of the way to save money on a large acquisition is to make it available for other people to buy, so that the contractor you're hiring to do the work actually keeps the rights to it and can license it to additional people. And in some contracts, you can even benefit from that future licensing by being an early player in that process. So often multiple operators will jump on board right up front before the data are even acquired and help fund it. And so those kinds of relationships can be really helpful in getting something done. But yes, so because of that, obviously it's very clear that these data can't just be loosely available through public means. So many states, for log data, many states require that you provide them with certain information about the wells that you're drilling, and different states require different levels of disclosure there, and they provide it to the public in different ways. So every geologist loves working North Dakota because they require a lot of logs and they give them to everybody. So you can go in and get things for nothing and start making maps before you've even come in and make major acquisitions. So there's a lot of differentiation there. But yes, there's confidentiality in all steps of the process. And I would never approach one of those larger acquisition programs without a really good lawyer. I've had some great relationships early in my career with lawyers who helped to train me in their role versus mine. And I think that that's a key that some people don't get early on. And I'm really grateful to those colleagues who said, no, this is the kind of, I'm not going to tell you what to do here. This is your decision, but this is my decision. So
no, I agree. I've had some good colleagues that have helped kind of guide me, attorneys, colleagues that have guided me. And it's like, this is really what you're looking at, and I think buttoning up those contracts really are just, so important, so they're not facing heartache down the road, right? Or making a bad decision or something happens that it doesn't think so and fall apart, and then you end up in a lawsuit or whatever,
Yeah, one thing I think is important to establish up front, if you're doing something that's new to you as an operator, is to work with a vendor to make sure that you're not a guinea pig for them too. I've been in a situation where, the vendor talked a really good game and was ready to go, had the equipment, and we got in the middle of the job. We're like, we're not sure you've actually done this before. So I've learned to talk with other operators. Hey, have you used them for this? What are we doing? And just make sure we're on top of asking directly as well, whether we're a guinea pig for them.
Yeah, that's some great advice there, not to be the sort of the guinea pig or the first go around, even if it's discounted, right?
Right.
There's nothing like telling the president of the company, yeah, this didn't work out very well. Sorry about that $2 million project there that failed. So yeah, no doubt about it. Well, that's good. Well, this has really been great to kind of understanding in the limited amount of time we have as far as geology is concerned. I know that you're involved in a lot of different other types of things, and maybe kind of share some of the things that you're involved in outside of geology.
Okay, yeah, I've been involved in a number of trade organizations, both in geology and more broad. And I'll tell you about a couple of my favorites.
Sure.
One is the Energy Finance Discussion Group, which is run by Andy Logan in Denver. And it's a monthly breakfast and networking discussion, usually with a talk, where it's a mixed audience of industry people and investors, bankers, analysts, sometimes real estate or pipeline people. And the talks are about where oil prices are going, or new structures for financing companies, or what are some disruptors that are on the way, those kinds of things. So it's really interesting and a nice way to tie in those financial skills and enhance those over time. Another one that I really enjoy is the Oklahoma Business Ethics Consortium. I was quite active when I moved to Tulsa for a few years in that organization, and I had to leave it behind when I came back to Denver. But with the pandemic, they've gone virtual, and I've been able to join again, and I can attend talks from Denver. It's the only organization like it in the United States, and I definitely recommend it.
What makes it unique?
Well, it's just, again, a monthly luncheon, and they bring in speakers to talk about ethics. One month it was a panel of journalists, and they talked about ethics and journalism, and they had a moderator who asked some key questions, and it was fascinating to get the different takes on it. Another one was sort of more like a corporate training. I think the person who wrote Who Moved My Cheese came and talked about their program. We've had a cowboy ethics talk. I gave a little talk about being raised in my dad's household. He was an ethics expert and professor, so that was fun. And it's just a really, really interesting and good group founded by Lynn Flynn there in Oklahoma.
All right, fantastic.
And then, of course, over the last few years, I've been on the advisory board, and I chair the advisory board of the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists.
Yeah.
It's one of the largest geological societies in the US. And our job as an advisory board is to help them align their programming to what some of their largest constituents are looking for. So do they offer the right classes that are needed by or right events that are needed by their largest groups in academia, government, industry, all kinds of geologists. And so, of course, that drives, if they're aligned, the better aligned they are, the more sponsorships they'll get, more memberships. And so it's a nice symbiotic relationship there.
So the alignment there, you said it occurs with like a university and then an outside group, or what's the alignment again?
The alignment is between the organization RMAG and the constituents they serve. So people who employ lots of
who are the constituents they serve? Who would be an example?
So geoscientists, only geos can be members of this organization. And they might work for an environmental company or an oil and gas company or for a university or for the US Geological Survey. And so there are different groups of geologists in the area. And by making sure that they're offering things that are of interest to those different groups, they can bolster their membership.
Okay, gotcha.
Makes them better at what they do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that sounds great. It sounds like you're involved in a lot of different, areas and locally and a little bit outside, but keeps you busy for sure.
Yeah, now I'm in the vendor audit fold. Who knew?
Wow. And it's coming up on October 28th and 29th.
I'm excited about it.
Do you have a title for your presentation?
Yes, it's called Turning Unturned Stones, illuminating the slightly unusual relationship between geoscientists and their vendors.
I think you won the title award for sure. when I first saw that, I started laughing. I was like, going, that's so creative. And from a geoscientist, no less, No, that's great. And kind of give us a little bit of a sort of an executive summary of what the talk's going to be about.
Yeah, so I'll try to cover a little bit about what we've talked about today, about what a geoscientist does, what kinds of vendors we need, And I'll talk about some stories of going through that process, what I look for in vendors, what other geoscientists might look for in vendors, and then talk a little bit more about the vendor side. What are they looking for? What do they need to know? What questions should they be asking that aren't always resolved by operators coming in? The one thing in particular is the geologists aren't typically, until the upper management, they're not typically the ones signing the invoices. And so you want to make sure that if they're the primary people ordering the service, that they're involved even though they're not the final sign-off. So there can be some confusion there in terms of approving invoices and making sure that everybody who needs to see it has seen it. So those are some of the things from the vendor perspective that I hope to cover.
That's great. It's fantastic because, not to knock any of the previous presentations, because all of them have been fantastic, but they've, kind of focused just on, one side of the fence. And I think the audience will appreciate the fact that, it goes really along with the mission of our group, and that's sort of create this platform where we can come together and share best practices. And that sharing is the operator in this case, and then the third party, the vendor, the supplier. So that's gonna be fantastic. I'm looking forward to it, Lee. And I know a lot of people will be too. So good.
Like a great lineup of speakers.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. The registration just opened today, and they're coming through. So yeah, it's kind of like I don't know. It's just fun to see this kind of these emails pop up, and it's like you have a new registration. So like you have a new mail. Anyways, but great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it, and I'm glad that we had some time to share a little bit about geology and what you're talking about, what you're involved in.
Thank you very much, Rick. I enjoyed it.
Good. Thanks.